Today on MuscleCar, all about rear ends. From assembly and calibration to Posis and peg legs, the Trans Am gets a power plant and a dry-sump oil system. And a tricked-out old Cutlass W-31 finds its original owner.
Hey, welcome to MuscleCar. You may not even recognize this car. It's our '69 Tribute Trans Am. Now, it left here a month ago. It was looking pretty sad, but since then, year one has put in over 300 hours. I'll tell you, there's not much left of the original sheet metal on this thing. In fact, the only original panel is this fender right here, and even it's been patched back together. This car started out as what looked like a good condition 400. It was even a pretty good driver. But after blowing it apart and having it blasted, the truth came out. Rust on every panel, gallons of fiberglass and Bondo. This car looked like it was pieced together by a band of monkeys working by candlelight. Since Brent and I have our hands full with Red Sled and the Comet, year one offered to take this poor bird under their wing. Now, along with extensive rust repair, they also replaced a lot of sheet metal. They even dropped in the subframe connectors, put in the rear tubs, and they hooked us up with a trick set of adjustable hood hinges. Now, the whole car has been mocked up except for this rear end. Now, we want to make sure that these brackets and everything are going to line up before we start our body work. So we're going to set up this rear axle here next. We're starting with a brand new housing, a gear set, Eaton Posi, and Mosier axles. Now, all that was supplied by drivetrain specialists. Then Detroit Speed stepped up and cut it to length and got all these brackets here mounted for us. First, we're assembling the ring gear to the Posi unit. For those noobs out there who don't understand what a Posi is, well, stick around because we'll show you once this thing gets assembled. And once the bolts are in, use a torque wrench to tighten them to 50 pounds. We've already pressed in the race, so we can go ahead and drop in the pinion with a mock-up bearing to check the depth. How to do this? Well, use a pinion depth tool, of course. We'll take a reading with no shims first. Then add shims to bring it up to the gear manufacturer's depth specs. Next is the backlash setup. Press the bearings onto the carrier unit, then drop the assembly into the housing with no shims. Using a dial indicator, measure the distance it moves away from the pinion. Remove the pinion, drop the carrier unit back in, and measure the total distance the carrier moves in the housing. These two measurements tell us how thick the shim pack needs to be. Now we can reassemble the axle with the pinion, carrier, and shims, but without the crush sleeve. With the dial indicator, we'll measure the backlash. It's within spec, so the caps can go on. It's time to check the contact pattern on our teeth. To do that, we're going to use some of the paint supplied in the kit. We're going to apply that onto the teeth, spin the carrier around, and see where we're at. The contact patch should be in the center of the tooth. If this isn't right, you'll get that annoying gear whine. This looks good, so we'll go ahead and tear it apart one more time so we can put the crush sleeve between the pinion bearings. With the mock-up bearing out of the way, we can press in the real bearing. Time to put it all back together one last time. Drop in the assembled pinion, tap in the other bearing, the seal, and then the yoke. Tighten the yoke with an impact until you feel a drag on the pinion. Then measure the rotational load using an inch-pound torque wrench. We're looking for about 20 pounds with a consistent reading throughout the rotation. With the pinion rotation set, we can drop the carrier and shims back in and tighten the caps to 50 to 60 pounds. I checked our backlash and our tooth pattern one more time and we're looking killer. And that means we can stab in our axles here and finally button this thing up. Now, if you notice on our axles, there's no indent for a C-clip. Why not? Because we ain't using them. What we are going to use is a Ford 9-inch style retainer. Now, this eliminates the C-clips because they can come loose. And when they come loose, you can lose your axle. And these are a whole lot safer. These retainers not only hold the axles in, they also serve as mounts for the brake calipers. I said earlier that I was going to explain to some of you younger guys what a Posi is. Since we still have the original 10-bolt out of our Firebird laying around, I figured a side-by-side comparison is going to be our best bet. Now this style carrier is referred to as an open differential. That's because at any given time, power is only getting sent to one wheel. Now other terms for this rear end are one-legger or peg leg, or my personal favorite, weak. Now why do they use it? Well, it is smooth and quiet and it works awesome for your daily commute. But if you ever try to put some serious power to it, you're either going to blow the spider gears out of it or you'll end up with one wheel going up in smoke. Now the rear end we just assembled is a Posi traction unit, or Posi for short. What it does is it ties both the wheels together with the pinion and eliminates all the spider gears. That way it can hold up to gobs of power. Now since both the wheels are getting equal amounts of power, you get way better traction and the potential for a lot better acceleration. Not to mention the fact, burnouts are way cooler with a Posi. Now stick around, because when we come back, we're going to start mocking up the rear end on a Firebird. Okay, once we finish getting our bars hooked up, we'll get our rear end put into place and start building our mounts for our coilovers. We attach the arms to the car before jacking up the rear end, so all we need to do is bolt them into place on the housing. Our rear end housing was delivered with the lower mounts for our coilovers. The upper one, it's a different story. We're gonna have to figure something out. Hey Brent, what do you think, man?
Well, we definitely can't attach it to that sheet metal right there.
Nah, just rip that right out. What do you think if we take a brace and run it from this edge and kind of arc it up and over? We can do it on both sides and actually box that whole thing in, drop a hole through it, and run a bolt through it and anchor it. Think that'd be strong enough?
Yeah, I think it would be.
If not, we'll always swear it should have been. These mounts are supporting the entire back of the car, so we'd rather overbuild them than take any chances. Now these were cut out of 1/8" plate. I'm mocking up the assembly before putting them in place to make sure the spacing between the plates is correct. Before welding them in place, I'll double check the angle to make sure the coilovers are vertical. Now once the welds cool down, we can mount the coilovers and mark one more thing off our list. Our one-off wheels haven't arrived yet, so we'll put these on for rollers. Now this isn't just your average run-of-the-mill restoration. There's a lot of one-off parts involved here, and since we don't want to have to make changes once we start the bodywork, we're putting the drivetrain in now. The weight of this thing can change your body panel alignment, and since it's an LS7, that means it runs the dry-sump oil system and a breather, and that means something's going to have to get cut. The tranny going behind this LS7 is TCI's Super Street Fighter. It's an ultra-tough version of the 4L60E, designed to handle up to 600 horses. It can be driven as an automatic or manually shifted so you can bang through the gears with no lag time. We're also dropping in our radiator from Be Cool so we can make sure the dry-sump tank will clear. Now, every LS7 runs a dry-sump system. This not only increases oil capacity, but it also cuts down on oil aeration and frees up horsepower. Now, this 2-gallon tank here from Peterson, well, this needs to find a home somewhere underneath the hood. Since the battery is migrating to the trunk, it's going to take up that real estate. We got a breather over here also that needs to be mounted, and this has to be higher than the tank. That way oil doesn't accumulate inside. The outlet on the tank also needs to be higher than the inlet on the engine so that the oil drains back to the pump. We found a good place to put it, but there's some sheet metal in the way. No problem. Well, we thought it looked pretty good until we realized it was hitting the bottom of the fender. But we can make some more room. We're patching it back in to keep the area sealed off from dirt and debris. on, man. It's looking good.
Yeah, I don't think this looks too bad. Need to put us a little plate or something right here to mount this bracket to, though.
Yeah, maybe box this in a little bit and get some support and bolt it in. Cool, that'll work. Well, hey, while we fab up some brackets over here, you guys can go fab yourself up a sandwich. But don't go too far, because we're going to be finishing up this dry sump system later in the show.
Up next, a solid gold Olds with all the options. Today's flashback, a 1970 Olds Cutlass W-31.
Ever wish you could get back that car you had in your youth? And not just one that looked like it, but the exact same car? Well, that's what happened to Bill Baggett in his 1970 Olds Cutlass W-31.
Well, I always liked those mobiles. I had a used 68, and I always liked the A-body style. And this 70 model came out with the fiberglass hood and all the amenities it had. I fell in love with it.
As a college student back in 1970, Bill bought this car new off the lot and spared no expense tricking it out.
I wanted a nice car, you know, that looked good, run good.
Bill started with a Cutlass S and added the W-31 package, which included a fiberglass hood with twin scoops and chrome twist locks, racing stripes down the side and on the hood, and a 325 horsepower 350 V8 with ram air induction. He also added a Muncie close ratio 4-speed with a Hurst competition shifter, rocket rally pack gauges with a tick-tock tack, a sport steering wheel, and to top it all off, an 8-track player. Nothing like a little solid gold to match that factory color, the nugget gold.
The salesman at the place where I got the car, he had some final parting words for me. He said, "Son, you better aim that cannon before you fire it."
That firepower came from the W-31 engine, which had a large bore and a short stroke. With 10.5 to 1 compression, heads equipped with a 2-inch intake and an 1 5/8" exhaust valve, plus a high overlap cam, this small block really built up big power.
I had it on the strip a few times when it was new. Always had good success with it. It usually won its class wherever I put it.
But soon, Bill had to hang up his racing helmet.
After my wife and I married, 3 or 4 years later, along came baby girl. We brought her home from the hospital in it, and we figured, you know, this is not exactly the car that we would want to have in raising a family. So in 1981, we sold it for peanuts, $2,500.
20 years passed and the car went through several owners, as well as receiving a total restoration by Richard Kitzmiller in Prairie Village, Kansas. Then one night in 2001, Bill got an unexpected phone call.
Lo and behold, it was the guy that owned the car, some 5 owners later. So he told me that he was coming to Nashville to Cool Springs Galleria. When I saw it again, I wanted to kick myself for ever selling it to begin with.
The car looked just as it did when it rolled off the lot, except a rear spoiler had been added, one of the few options Bill didn't get back in 1970. Bill managed to buy the car back from the owner a few months later. Boy, is he glad he did. Turns out this is one of only 74 still known to exist.
If you're ever able to get your car back you had when you were growing up, take good care of it. Don't abuse it like you did when you were young. You'll always be happy that you did.
Our muscle car builders try to find the missing piece of a plumbing puzzle without showing plumber's crack.
This actually needs to come in a little bit underneath that though. Hey, welcome back. We got a dry sump tank mounted. Now all we need to do is get our breather mounted and then run all the lines. But we got a slight problem. I can't get at the back side of the firewall, but I got a solution for you. I'm gonna show you a little trick here. Riv nuts. So what's a riv nut? They're threaded inserts, also known as poly nuts. They make for an easy install in places where you can only access the front of the sheet metal. All you have to do is drill a hole, then use a thread setter tool to insert the sleeve. The sleeve gets crushed into place and threaded at the same time. A couple of these babies and the breather is good to go. With everything else in place, the lines can go in. We're using massive -12 lines to go from the tank to the breather and for the oil return from the engine to the tank. By running them over the wheel well, they'll be hidden from view, keeping a clean look in the engine bay. One of these two -6 outlets would go to an air cleaner if this was a factory setup, but we don't need it, so it's gonna get capped. The other one runs the PCV valve. Last up is one more -12 line from the tank to the inlet on the engine, right next to the outlet we ran going back to the tank. Air induction's up next. The fans are going in first, so we know how much room we'll have to run the ductwork. Well, we got a lot to work with here, and Spectra Performance makes just about anything you'd need to customize your air induction. Now, we're not really sure what all here we're going to be using, but one thing I do know is that we need to find a place for this mass airflow sensor. As for the rest of it, time to figure it out. After trying dozens of different combinations, we finally found one that works. Now, we could have put this whole thing together using the silicone couplers, but Brent had a cool idea. He TIG welded it all together and made it all nice and smooth. Now, we still have a lot of work left to do on our Tribute Trans Am, so we're going to keep wrenching and thrashing. So until next time, we're out of here.